All right, now, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that I introduce our esteemed keynote speaker, Dr. Robert Hess. Dr. Hess's career and accomplishments are as diverse as they are remarkable. Dr. Hess has degrees in both faith and science, earning professional engineering licenses in 4 states and 3 disciplines. He has traveled to over 100 countries on all 7 continents. Dr. Hess studied for 6 years for the priesthood and is a permanent Catholic deacon serving the Archdiocese of Galveston and Houston, as well as a retired vice chairman and current faculty of the Institute for Spirituality and Health in the Texas Medical Center. He's an adjunct professor at UST and a faculty member at Father Spitzer's Magis Center and the Amos Spirituality Center. Dr. Hess formerly served on the Archdiocesan Deacon Spiritual and Community Life Committees and on the Holy Name Retreat Center, numerous ACTS retreats, and Prison Colby retreat teams. While a young seminarian, Hess went on a retreat to Gethsemane Monastery, home to then hermit Trappist monk Thomas Merton, whose books later inspired Hess's contemplative prayer practice. Hess was appointed by Trappist monk Thomas Keating as a commissioned presenter and co-coordinator for contemplative outreach. In response to an invitation by the Dalai Lama, Dr. Hess was designated as an emissary to the first contemplative outreach dialogue with Dalai Lama's Mind and Life Institute for research on contemplatives. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Robert Hess.
Thank you very much, and it's an honor to be here with you all, and hope we're going to have some fun. Now, is the microphone working? I got to talk down. First, I'd like to start with what a miracle is, and I like to do quotes and see if you can guess who said it. Miracles are not contrary to nature, but only contrary to what we know about nature. Think about it. There are only 2 ways to live your life, as though nothing is a miracle or as though everything is a miracle. St. Augustine of Hippo. Everybody thinks you got to look for an exception to the laws of nature to have a miracle. That's insulting to God, I think. The miracle is this. And somebody agrees with him. Einstein agrees with him. And so that's the basis on why we're searching with research and all, because God gave us the gift of reason. We should use it. So prayer definitions, let's start from the beginning so we can get to the centering prayer part. Meditation, Latin meditatio, meaning to think. It focuses on thoughts, including adoration, contrition, thanksgiving, and supplication, ACTS, not the same as ACTS retreats. Mind alone or verbalized. Now think about that for a minute, because I think it's going to fly in the face of the modern culture. Contemplation is Latin contemplatus, means to gaze attentively, resting in God. It is silent without thoughts, thus opening ourselves to the gift of divine union. It's synonymous with mystical, and I'm going to be using those words interchangeably. What's noticeable here is if you hear the word meditation in the secular world, they apply it to both of these. But that's not the way the etymology of the words are, and that's not what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to use these definitions. Neuroscience and neurotheology. This presentation is going to be in 3 parts: brain neuroplasticity, medical research, and then collective oneness. And I'll put a slide between as I go through so you can see the breakpoint. Brain's neuroplasticity. For a long time, scientists and theologians thought that this universe was static and the brain was static. And they both changed. And they had to change because then they realized they're both dynamic, they're changing. And brain neuroplasticity is one of them. Neuroplastic learning, interesting. Neuroplasticity means that emotions such as happiness and compassion can be cultivated in much the same way that a person can learn through repetition to play golf and basketball or master a musical instrument, and that such practice changes the activity and physical aspects of specific brain areas. Andrew Weil, MD, very interested in this subject. He is well known. Neuroplasticity and mindfulness. Nature has endowed the human brain with the malleability and flexibility that lets it adapt to the demands of the world it finds itself in. This was spoken by a researcher, Richie Davison, and he's doing research on Monk Mathieu Ricard. I met both of them when I was doing what Keating asked me to do and visit their research. And it's fascinating. And I came back and told Keating that this is solid research, but it's non-theistic. And that's okay, but that they have very good research and it's shown a lot. And they did most of it on Tibetan Buddhists and use EEG scans quite often. And I will go on to where took a break point and suddenly it started to snap. Religion and Health. This is a brilliant work, Handbook of Religion and Health, edited by Harold Koenig. And we are blessed to have him have done this because he compiled all the research in basically 3 different areas. And it's a book about this thick. If you have a belief in a God, you heal better. This is a well-being curve that just to demonstrate it. Up the first one, belief. The second is church attendance, regardless of your faith. If you attend church, you live up to 7 years longer. There are a lot of benefits, and he goes through it in terms of immune system, a whole bunch of things. And meditation prayer lowers depression, and there have been a number of research projects on that. But that's meditation primarily. And then it hit me, why don't we get double bang for our buck? Why don't we study theistic meditation, get the advantage of what he's learned, and not just do it non-theistically in the Buddhist tradition? And I'm honoring them, that's fine. I'm not disparaging it. But why not take advantage of this? And so that leads to the prayer definitions a little bit and how I move forward with this. Okay. Contemplative prayer, God's gift of divine union. And it's synonymous with mystical. Then centering prayer is a method to facilitate contemplative prayer. It's not specifically contemplative prayer. And I know when I experienced this practice and I started to read Merton in his 7-Story Mountain, his classic, he only had one line on how to deal with your thoughts. I couldn't believe it. And then it's only when I read the Mystics, started to venture into as many as I could, that I discovered Thomas Keating's Open Mind, Open Heart. That did it for me. And basically, it led me to the centering guidelines that he outlined. And I'm going to tell you what these are so that you know when we do the research, you know what the patients were doing, the subjects, okay? Basically, you pick a symbol, which is a symbol of your desire to be with God. It can be either a word or an image. Most beginners use a word. And you focus on that, and then inevitably, you're going to have, you sit in a comfortable position and not jumping around and I can't get in the lotus position, but I sit on a chair like everybody that does centering prayer. And you rest in the word when you need it. And of course, thoughts and return will come. Lots of thoughts will come. And when those thoughts come, what do? And that's what Merton didn't have. He didn't have that methodology. And basically what you do is every time you become aware of your thoughts or become aware you're engaged with your thoughts, you ever so gently return to your sacred word. You're gently letting go of your thoughts. Remember, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your thoughts my thoughts, said the Lord, scripture. So what happens then? You rest. Now, you may have 1,000 thoughts or 5. It doesn't matter, and you don't make any judgments on them. And then you have a gentle readjustment at the end. And it basically is, the scriptural basis is Matthew 6:6. When you pray, when Jesus was asked how you pray, the first thing he said was not the Our Father. He said, when you pray, go to your inner room, close the door, pray to your heavenly Father in secret, and he will hear you in secret. Do not be like the pagans who use many words. So there's a gentle readjustment at the end. Now, it turns out that in this modern world where we can't seem to get along with each other, uh, all the religions basically have both meditation and contemplation, all of them. And so I was seeking the interfaith approach. What religions had the same prayer? Because in the silence, there's no dogma. Christianity, mysticism, just described it. Judaism is Kabbalah. Islam, Sufism. Buddhism, mindfulness, and I point out here that Zen allows for a belief in God. And Hinduism is a monotheistic religion, and they have their practice. And basically, in that silence is no dogma. So now I was interested in the research that affected everybody, not just our Catholic faith or our Christian faith. And what was the medical research? Well, let's start with neuroplasticity. The first person to really, one of the early ones to do this was Adam Newberg. Now, he has co-authored some research we've done, but he was one of the first to do brain scans, MRIs of Franciscan nuns doing centering prayer. And the baseline was before they started. And after the prayer, the brain was obviously changing. It's in the parietal area in the back. Okay. Now, fascinating. That got people thinking that, hey, we should be looking at this from a spiritual standpoint of theism, not just non-theism. Divine effects. Well, I've taught this to thousands around the world, and I've seen things happen you would not believe. And that's what motivated me. I saw, oh my goodness, I can't just sit here and enjoy the pleasure of this prayer, which is a lot of what people do. We have to give back. We have to show love and kindness and give this gift to others. So, what are the effects that I observed? Well, the gifts of the Holy Spirit, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, charity, love, chastity. Now, that quite often happens outside the prayer. And it's the one that's reported the most is peace. There's also mysticism of partial or full out-of-body ecstasy. I've seen this happen, and it's a gift of the spirits are happening not, usually outside the prayer, but the mysticism can happen during the prayer and can happen at other times outside the prayer. And it's not as common. 5% of the people, perhaps. Mystical out of body, let's talk about how much. Well, how often, whatever the research has shown. About 6% have this experience. Now, I've found out that even if they're not practicing centering prayer, they'll have it. But the centering prayer opens you up to the gift a bit more because I'll get into why, the brain and why it works that way. Greater than 1 hour is rare. 1 to 2 lifetime occurrences. It doesn't usually repeat quite often. Greater percentage early in wakefulness. The early morning hours, the brave waves are such that they're more receptive. And Scripture talks about being given guides into the prophets learned from the early morning, their dreams, which were actually ended up not dreams. Greater percent lying down and a greater percent floating above, out of body. So the contemplative research we got into was basically 4 areas, comparing near-death and mystical experiences. And I coined the word SCE, meaning spiritual contemplative experiences, because both of these are really mystical experiences, but one is connected with death and one's connected with contemplative prayer. And bipolar disorder, Parkinson's disease, and PTSD. So let's talk about these. The brain duality. First, before we get into the research, I have to explain the brain duality because it plays a big role in how our brain reacts to this prayer practice, in addition to being neuroplastic. There's a conscious and unconscious brain duality. Science doesn't use the word subconscious. Conscious is what, and the unconscious. And I'm just going to give you a flavor for what the differences are. You may know this already. The unconscious is fast, the conscious slow. Unconscious is automatic, conscious is systematic. Unconscious reactive, conscious proactive. Unconscious is impulsive, conscious is reflective. Emotion, reason. Limbic system, neocortex, oldest part of the brain, is the unconscious. The youngest is the conscious. And interesting enough, the real estate, if you want to call it that, is about 95% dedicated to the unconscious and about 5% to the conscious. This is very similar to dark energy and dark matter compared to visible in the universe. I'll come back to that, but just note interesting little things happen, you know. So let's talk about NDE and mystical experience. The anecdotal motivation for this came from the fact that I taught this to 10 people, and at the end, 3 of them had had a previous near-death experience in their life, and during their first centering prayer set, they re-experienced their near-death experience, and they started to talk about it. I was stunned, and it was then that I started to realize that the attributes of the both of those is very similar. That was in I knew about the conscious and the unconscious 95, and then I discovered this in teaching it. Then I ran into one of the world's experts on disorders of consciousness, Dr. Calixto, and his daughter is also a neuroscientist, and I gave a full day presentation in Cuba during his conference, his international conference, sponsored by the educational system in Havana. This conference, he gave me a whole day to talk about faith and science, and the focus, of course, was on this. And I put together a team of people from Pontifical University, Harvard University. We did research down at Baylor College of Medicine on the MRIs, fMRIs. And so we presented it, and present is Calixto. And then he came up, and from there we rolled. And so during this conference, he came up to me and said, "Why don't you have a breakout session for centering prayer?" And I said, "Well, gosh, they're all atheists. I don't know how I'm going to do this. I've never done this before." So we did. And his daughter was there. And in her first 20-minute sit, afterwards, she starts to explain that she had an out-of-body experience. That's God. That's God motivating things. The question is, what tools were we going to use? We want to measure spatial and temporal in the brain. Now, different tools are better than for different things. The spatial tools are CAT scan, MRI, fMRI. MRI is a photograph, fMRI is a movie, in the simple terms. The best for temporal, in other words, when the thing happened, is a quantitative EEG. SPEC and PET, about halfway, but not that big. We chose quantitative EEG tomography. And we did the research in 3 phases: snapshot of a neural correlates, continuous neural with continuous EEG, and then continuous anatomic assessment, CAA. And we did the scans over many different wavelengths, so I'm not going to go through all of them, and I'm going to just give you a flavor, one of each of these. The brain scans for the QEEG and the alpha wavelength were, and you know, this is one step that was critical. I said to Calixto, "You probably," he was an expert at bringing people out of coma. I said, "You probably have a lot of brain scans of people who've had near-death experiences. Did you have people that talked about it?" He said, "All the time. But I don't know if they were having it when I did the brain scan." I said, "Well, that messes our research up, right? There's no way you can catch them in it." He says, "No, neuroscientists accept that if you remember the event, it's almost the same as the event itself. And the demonstration of that is PTSD. If people feel certain things, they're triggered back to that moment." So I believed him. He's the neuroscientist. So we did a baseline using QEEG at the alpha range, and baseline NDE and remembering. And then we did it, and he had the patience for that. The question is, I'm in Cuba, where am I going to get these patients that were not patients? They were people that were taught centering prayer. Sure enough, Keating's Contemplative Outreach former chairman was a priest in Havana. I knew it. I called him, "Would you come over and teach this in Spanish?" Because it was all in English. But you don't teach this without knowing the language because it's tough. There's a nuance in the words. So SCE, we did it baseline and then remembering the SCE event, and we compared the remembering the SCE and the NDE. And The QEG showed an increased activation for both, but especially NCE, which is rather interesting. They were remembering their contemplative experience while they were doing centering prayer. Continuous EEG. This basically, you can see when the remembering process starts, the waves start going up. And NDE, very similar pattern, but stronger. Continuous anatomical, these were heart rates, basically. So the heart calmed down when they were remembering. So interesting. Preliminary conclusions, significant QEG and CEG neural correlations across broad frequency ranges and Grayson scales. Grayson is a scale for measuring this between NDE and SCE. Significant CA emotional correlation between SCE and NDE. Teaching centering prayer could lessen fear of death. This is where we're heading into ministries, because if you can show people how this can help, you're actually at the transition between this world and the left and the next. This is the transcendent point. So, very positive. Bipolar disorder. My wife suffered from bipolar disorder. I taught it to her. Got to be sure I'm on time here. I taught it to her. She had terrible ruminations. It's awful. And I suspected that she might benefit from this, and I taught it to her. And she went deep for 45, 50 minutes. After 20, I left quietly. She continued in the backyard. And as you know, the conscious brain is ruminating up and down. The unconscious can't unload to the conscious brain, which happens. And that's why the ruminations get calmed, and then the divine healer, the unconscious, can unload. We just finished this research. It's not in my book. I've got a book outside that talks about a lot of the research, but not this. It just came out. Basically, there was a marker for depression and bipolar in the brain. And before the centering prayer, that marker was there. And after, gone. This is meaningful. So our intent is to form a ministry for that. Okay, but most of these research projects we had, we were self-funding. There were only 5 patients, so we didn't have a big enough sample. We need to ramp it up to 25 or so. That would be more statistically significant. Now, Parkinson's. Now, I've given you a lot of brain scans and everything, and that's not quite as meaningful as touchy-feely. After the end of the conference in Cuba, we reported the NDE research results in 2015. Janine asked me to come to her house and teach her family's centering prayer. I went over there. She said one of the families suffers from from Parkinson's. And I thought, how am I going to do this? And then suddenly he went into a full freeze, which is a catatonic seizure in lay terms. And I was getting translated into Spanish to him. At the end of that, everybody settled down. I left my eyes open a little bit more, because when I'm following somebody, I try to keep a little bit more alert. I didn't go as deep. Within 1 or 2 minutes, down. I nearly dropped my teeth. And after it was over with, I brought them all, they all came out gently. He stayed there. And he got up and he walked up to me and he said, in passionate Spanish, he told me what happened. I didn't understand him. So then they translate. And he said, when Castro took over, they took the children into the countryside and purged them of their belief in God. I have finally found God. And he wept and I wept on each other's shoulder. I leaned to the 2 neuroscientists in the room who couldn't help. I said, this is your next research project. So sure enough, after we got the money together, a couple of years later, I called down there and about launching it. And I'll tell you what happened after you see the results first.
pacientes hacen su rutina diaria.
Do we have sound? Hello? Okay. You can read it a little bit here. It's in Spanish anyway, so he was obviously in a freeze moment, and then he was taught centering prayer, and you'll get the gist of it.
El paciente hace su rutina diaria en 2 ocasiones al día, a veces hasta 3, en su centro de meditación acompañado por sus familiares. En este caso, no le hicimos.
Currently, this patient is in an advanced stage of the disease, so he's no longer any medical treatment can be helpful. And when they are not done, he gets generalized anxiety state. He ends up in a state of mutism. You can see that the trembling is generalized, and the anguish invades him, which in turn, I can't read it fast enough. We will notice the change before centering prayer and after. Now, that's not the way you teach centering prayer, but we didn't have a trainer to do it at the time. She did it on her own because she remembered what I did. They did a pretty good job, but you don't touch the person. It's all, that just adds to the more ruminations. As you can see, first his left hemibody stopped shaking, then finally his right. Seeing is believing. What's happening is, and I saw this when I taught it, the patient is so anxious to stop this because they don't want to hurt other people's feelings, that the focus on trying to stop it is absolutely the counterproductive way to do it. The best way is to let go of the control and rest in God. And that lessens the ruminations of the conscious brain, and the divine healer can come in the unconscious. And that's it. So I think you got the idea. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. I can give you anecdotal experiences of this. Taught it to 10 people. Man came back. How's it going? He said, well, I really had a pretty unusual experience. I said, what happened? He says, suddenly, during the prayer, I became fully aware of what really happened to me in Vietnam. I said, what did you do? He said, I ever so gently let it go and return to God. I told that to Dr. Klomex, one of the top psychiatrists in Houston. He's retired now. He dropped his jaw. He said, we don't know how to treat PTSD. We got whole floors of them at the VA hospital. So we negotiated an agreement there to start a research project, and it's not started yet, but we're funded to start a research project on it. Collective oneness. One of the things that people will talk about when they have these moments is a sense of oneness and peace. And it intrigued me because the very thing that initiated me to think about getting the ND and SC studied was I mentally realized there were common attributes. And so it dawned on me, let's look at those attributes. Because this is at the transcendence between this life and the next. There's no question in my mind about it. So this is Dr. Moody described the ND attributes in 75, and Bruce Grayson developed a scale for it. And then then you had Dr. William James describe the mystical SC attributes and the varieties of religious experience in 1902. And they match, and I'll show you how they match. But then I was intrigued because I'm teaching a faith and science course, and in the book, it's 4 sections: physics to creation, chemistry to life, biology to consciousness, and psychology to mysticism. Now, we're talking about the psychology to mysticism, but the first one, physics to creation, leads you to the singularity. Einstein's theoretical theories led to the singularity attributes at the beginning of the Big Bang. Son of a gun, if they didn't match the other two. Now, I'm not suggesting we can do research on that, but curious, Why not? Paranormal and NDE, out of body, spaceless ecstasy, dimensionless, non-material. The singularity is non-material. Cognitive, timeless short prayer. People who practice and go deep, 20 minutes, you ask them how long it's been, and they'll say 5 minutes, and it was 20. Timeless, there's no light. Without light, there's no time. Effective peace, wholeness, perfection, a sense of perfection and wholeness. Ordered universe, zero entropy. Are we getting goosebumps here a little bit? Okay. Transcendent, divine, religious oneness with the universe. Unified theory, Einstein's unified theory, pulling all the forces together in one equation. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. And I say that, this is said because that PTSD patient had to go through that and he was able to deal with it. The divine healer knew that he knew how to let go of these things now, and that was healing. He knew that now he can let that unconscious thought come to the conscious brain. Carl Jung. One consciousness. There is the possibility that there is only one self. There is only God. There is only one self or one consciousness, in fact. And in the light of scientific discoveries, if there is one consciousness, it is the infinite, unlimited consciousness of God, which is shared with every creature according to its capacity. My mentor, Thomas Keating. Devout Christian. This is a powerful one. The devout Christian of the future will either be a mystic, one who has experienced something, or he, she will cease to be anything at all. Drop your teeth. Karl Rahner, theologian. I think he taught Pope Benedict. I think that he was his instructor. Correct? I think so, yeah. Faith and Science textbook. This is the book that I'm using to teach the graduate course on Faith and Science now. In fact, some of the classes in here. That's the book, and a teacher's guide to help people teach the subject. And so what I've been talking about here today is in the book in the last chapter, The Psychology of Mysticism. It's also a memoir. Well, how much time do I have left? I wanted to give 15 minutes for questions, so I got about 3 more minutes, right? Okay. This is a stunner. This is the way God works. I teach at the Pontifical University Regina Apostolorum in Rome too, with this book. And I'm over in Rome, and I go to my friend who runs a couple of hotels, and I said, he's pretty connected, Hans Cortial. I said, I just attended a conference in Dallas that Bishop Barron put on titled Faith and Science. They shut the registration down at 1,000 people. This is a hot subject. And I was stunned. And he said, well, why don't we do it here? Then I thought about it. And he was the one that twice in different years I was there, came to my room. He said, tonight I'm putting on a private concert in the Sistine Chapel. Do you want to attend? Well, I'm kind of busy, Of course. So I knew this guy was capable. He's pulled this stuff off. So I go back, I agree. I'll go back to my hotel, think about it, come back. Well, we decided to do it. So save the date, Jubilee year, every, 50 years, every Jubilee year, 50. And it's going to be June 17th to the 20th, 2025. And it's going to be Faith and Science, following my book is the chapters. And not what I said, but we're going to get top-notch speakers, way beyond Bob. And the goal is to show that those leaving their faith and the clergy, scientists, and medical professionals serving them current faith and science reinforce each other to show them that. And when I was there, he made arrangements for me to give the book to the Pope. And the conference is going to be first regularly scheduled Faith and Science Conference. Book chapters are the agenda. The Pontifical Academy of Science, it was going to be a collaborator. And that's a quick story. He makes arrangements for me to meet the Chancellor, Cardinal Turkson of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, and also the President, Dr. von Braun. So I'm meeting with them, with my partner, and laying out an implementation plan, how we're going to do this, how we're proposing it. And we had an hour, and they were a little bit circumspect. And I said, well, here's the problem. They're not teaching faith and science in seminaries. Von Braun jumped up, and he pounded the table, and he says, you're absolutely right. I said, well, I want to change that. So at our seminary, they don't teach it. Chicago, they don't teach it. New York, they don't teach it. Los Angeles, they don't teach it. So that was part of the motivation. And then Pontifical University supporting affiliates, one of which is, and the main Pontifical University that's supporting it is Salesians. And this is a QR code for getting on our newsletter. And it's bigger here, and that should keep you posted. The website will go live within a week or two. So 15 minutes for questions.
All right, so we do have time for questions and answers here. So if anyone has a question, just raise your hand. If you can talk loud, that's great. If you need the mic, raise your hand. I'll run it over. We'll see how tired y'all can make me.
Not all at one time, please. Just control it.
Hello. Thank you for the talk. I wanted to ask about the, I think, EEG scans.
I'm hearing aids, so try
Okay.
again.
I'm here. So I wanted to ask about the EEG scans. Were they done before contemplative prayer? And then was the remembering session during contemplative prayer or after when they were asked to remember like a near-death experience?
Most of those studies were done during the prayer. In other words, the brain scans were being done during the prayer. And both MRI, it was QEEGT, but that's kind of like MRI, it was like a snapshot. But then when we did continuous EEG, it was during the prayer, during the remembering of the experience on the NDE mystical. During the remembering of the prayer. And that was not during the prayer. For NDE and mystical, it was remembering the prayer. And so we actually used guided meditation to help them remember. And then we went silent and we let them remember their experience. So it wasn't really during the prayer. However, the bipolar research, that was before and after. Okay. Yeah. So each one had its own twist. In all of those, we had about 5 control and 5 subjects, which makes the research preliminary. And we did that because we couldn't afford to do the whole thing. But it should be the focal point to say, yeah, look at this. This is promising. Now let's get serious and put some serious money into it. So we're trying to raise money to go that next step. And in Rome, we're going to hopefully report on all of these things. The conference will culminate in that. Well, in each case, it's a little different. In Parkinson's, we didn't do brain scans. It was a different approach. In the bipolar disorder, it turns out the control was before the implementation of the prayer. So it looked like it was going to be that way for all of them. So we just did it that way. But the intent was we had control group 5 and 5, basically. That was the intent. Oh, it's okay. We can talk. We can talk.
I had a quick question about how contemplative prayer relates to other things like TM, transcendent meditation, and like the calm app. And do you see any correlation to, or is there a difference between like doing contemplative meditation versus like TM or doing something like the calm app that's going around? You know, I'm wondering like, do you see that correlation with the what do you call it, the studies? Because I know there's been a lot of studies with TM. I was just wondering if you work with that too also.
Well, the transcendental meditation kind of caught on, and everybody then, when they got centering prayer, they said, well, centering prayer is new age. And actually, it's old age. It dates back to the conferences by John Cassing in 428, roughly AD. The main difference is the theistic base rather than your own mantra making the motion. Now, they do show benefits in the non-theistic. As a Catholic, I believe that God dwells within everyone on earth. So God is going to help everybody. What's not happening is capitalizing on what Harold Koenig did, and that is to show if you have a belief in God, it enhances even further. So why not take advantage of that for the 80% of the population that believes in God? Why insist that they do it non-theistic? And that's happening in the VA hospital, for example. You can't, non-theistic Buddhist is fine because it's not religion. Technically, the Buddhism is and I'm not bad-mouthing, it's wonderful. It's more of a philosophy. If you talk to the Tibetans, it's more of a philosophy, not a religion. So to answer your question, the benefits can come, but my concern is why not take advantage of the 80% of the population and the research Conan's dug up. That's my deal.
Okay, I just have a quick question. First, I want to say thank you for your presentation. So with the primary disorders mentioned, like Parkinson's, PTSD, et cetera, were those the primary ones that you saw were used in the research, or were there any other disorders that you saw really had an effect with the study shown?
Well, those were the ones that hit me between the eyes when I saw it happen, and I was teaching and I was stunned. There have been other things that have come about, absolutely, not necessarily tied to a particular illness. I taught it at the Quakers church. I've taught it at Interfaith. And we teach centering prayer interfaith, because once you enter the silence, you're there, okay? And at the Quaker church, they're wonderful. They're already sitting in silence. I thought, why am I here? They're doing great. And all of a sudden, one of them shouts out, "Hallelujah!" So then I taught it, and I said, now the only modification I might suggest is no shouting out, okay? But they were wonderful people. And this one lady comes up in a wheelchair. She said, how can I do this when I'm in pain constantly? I had talked to Keating about that subject before it happened. And one of the suggestions is, instead of your sacred word, you use the pain as your sacred word. Now, it turns out when I had my experience at Snowmass with Keating and they heard all, I twisted my ankle climbing up a mountain, stupid. And so in tremendous pain. So then I applied it. It's not easy, but there are ways of dealing with this. When you see the research on pain management in hospitals, the first one is narcotics. The second is prayer. And all the others are below. Lesser medications, aspirin, whatever, massage, whole bunch of other things. So it's pretty astounding that people are already using it, although that's not tied to a specific illness. It all ties really back to the unconscious and the conscious brain and how that works.
Right. Thank you for your presentation. I have to admit that I am a Catholic myself, and so I ask this question with the utmost respect. But I have, just from a scientific enterprise perspective, I have concerns regarding maybe controlling for the placebo effect and for the blindness of the study and the effect of how religious the subject is in terms of the effect of the treatment.
Well, we have legitimate concerns
Mhm.
on this research. I can tell you, number one, we don't have enough subjects. Number two, in the remembering research, NDSC, remembering is still not the same as actually happening. The control groups, that it can be a problem. The question is, what I have found that the secular world quite often will say, well, this is the placebo effect.
Mhm.
And I'll say, that's great. I don't care. Right? Let them think that it's God. If you don't believe it, let them think that. And if that helps, why are we fighting this? We don't even debate the placebo. Let it work. We need two Matthews.
Thank you for your presentation, first of all. But although the findings are preliminary, what could this mean for psychiatric and neuro patients in the future?
I think there's tremendous potential. And I think it's sufficient evidence to go to a wider study. And I'm cautious about calling it healing. It's certainly not necessarily cure. I'm not calling that. Healing's a softer word, but probably the better word is quality of life. And I've seen the quality of life improve in people. Those patients at Parkinson's that they did the study of, all four of them in Cuba, 4 or 5 of them in Cuba, are now having their seizures controlled. They practice this twice a day. They are no longer getting depressed because the seizures hit, the freezes hit in the middle of the night, wake them up. So they got sleep deprivation and then they get depressed. So now they don't have that happening. They don't get depressed. They want to eat and they want to get out. So I approached this on the neuroscience side, not because I'm a neuroscientist. I work with several of them, but that's what the secular world has to have to hear. And you'd be surprised how reluctant hospitals are to open themselves up to spirituality and health. That's why I was former vice chairman of the Spirituality Health Institute, which was the first one to teach chaplains. And so those two got split about 200 years ago. Now they're coming back together. They're converging asymptotically. I like that word. It's a math term, approaching infinitely without touching. It's just what I do. I like math. I couldn't help it. Does that answer your question? The answer is there's a lot of stuff going on here we got to do. Oh, you just cannot imagine. My wife suffered from bipolar for 45 years. The suffering she went through would boggle your mind. And when I saw her sit in silence for 45 minutes, that's what launched the bipolar research. It's anecdotal that gets it started. Scientists start with mind experiments. Einstein was classic. In fact, I'm convinced a lot of scientists have mystical experiences, and that's how they get their inventions. Einstein did. That's why he knew about mystical experiences, because he would have them, and that's where the thoughts came, the ideas came from.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you went from being
Basically, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And the problem is I still don't know. My book is like a memoir. And I didn't write it that way. It was originally like a textbook, and I kept getting encouraged to wrap my personal story in it. And that answers that question because I made a transition. When I left the seminary and got married, I left the Catholic Church for 23 years. And I came back through science. And God's love. Unless you experience God's love and you know God loves you no matter what, that will drive you the rest of your life. That's why Reiner touched me, Carl Reiner. You don't have that. If you don't, not necessarily have an experience, but practice being with God in silence. That's in a nutshell. You got to read the book for the first time.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. Anyone else? Can you just talk loud?
You give him a microphone, please. I'm old as dirt. I got the hearing aids.
Thank you for your presentation. I wanted to make sure something about the PTSD that caught my attention. So I saw that in the video about the divine healing. Don't you think that narcotics could have done the same thing or impede divine healing in a way? Or I'm just asking for an opinion.
I respect your question, and it's kind of related to what we talked about here. Yes, there are benefits that can come from transcendental meditation, something that's non-theistic. What I'm saying is, if there's research that shows you heal better, you may be placebo. I'm not going to get into that. Doesn't matter. And if you heal better if you have a faith belief, you go to church regularly and you pray regularly, moderate meditation actually, you heal better. So why not take advantage of that for the 80% of the population? That's all. And what's interesting is the study that needs to be done is to compare the two. And we haven't done that. In other words, to compare somebody that's doing non-theistic mantra versus theistic. And I would be interested in that. Did that answer your question? Okay.
All right, let's thank our speaker one more time.